In the beginning, there was only chaos, a swirling void of nothingness, dark and boundless, stretching across the emptiness where no light had ever shone. This wasn't merely darkness as we understand it today, but the complete absence of everything. No earth beneath, no sky above, no time to measure, no space to fill. Just chaos, the primordial abyss from which all existence would eventually emerge. But from this nothingness, something extraordinary happened. The first beings began to spontaneously emerge, not born in the way we understand birth, but simply coming into existence through mysterious forces beyond mortal comprehension. First came Gaia, the earth herself, broad-bosomed and eternal, who would become the foundation upon which all life would flourish. She arose not as a mere planet, but as a conscious, powerful deity, the very embodiment of the solid ground that would support mountains, valleys, and all the creatures yet to come. Next emerged Tartarus, that terrible place deep beneath the earth where the darkest souls would one day be punished. This wasn't simply an underground cave, but a cosmic prison, a realm of such depth and horror that even the gods themselves would shudder at its mention. Alongside Tartarus came Eros, the fundamental force of love and desire that would drive all creation forward, the irresistible power that would compel beings to unite, to create, to continue the great work of existence. From chaos also emerged Erebus, the personification of darkness itself, and Nyx, the primordial night. These weren't merely the absence of light, but active forces in their own right, cosmic powers that would play crucial roles in the ordering of the universe. Nyx, especially, would prove to be one of the most formidable powers in all creation, so mighty that even Zeus himself would later show her proper respect. But the real drama began when Gaia, in her cosmic wisdom, decided that she needed a partner equal to herself. Through her own divine will, she brought forth Uranus, the starry sky, to cover her completely and serve as the father of her children. This wasn't a marriage of equals in the way mortals might understand it, but a cosmic union between earth and heaven, the foundation and the dome, the stable and the infinite. Their offspring would be extraordinary beyond imagining. First came the Titans, 12 mighty beings who would rule the cosmos before the Olympian gods we know today. These weren't ordinary children, but cosmic forces in their own right. Oceanus, who would become the great river that encircled the world. Coeus, the embodiment of rational thought and intelligence. Cronus, master of the heavenly constellations. Hyperion, who would father the sun, moon, and dawn. Iapetus, ancestor of the human race. And most significantly Cronus, who would one day overthrow his father and rule the universe himself. The female Titans were equally magnificent. Theia, the divine light that would illuminate the heavens. Rhea, who would become the mother of the Olympian gods. Themis, the personification of divine law and order. Mnemosyne, the living embodiment of memory itself. Phoebe, who would control prophecy and oracular wisdom. And Tethys, the primordial sea goddess who would nurture countless water spirits. But Gaia and Uranus didn't stop with the Titans. They also created the Cyclopes, 3 massive beings with single eyes in the center of their foreheads, master craftsmen who would one day forge Zeus's thunderbolts. Their names were Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, representing thunder, lightning, and the bright flash of electrical fire. These weren't monsters in the way later myths would portray Cyclopes, but divine artisans whose skills would prove essential to the gods' eventual victory over the forces of chaos. Even more fearsome were the Hecaton Kyries, the 100-handed ones. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges possessed 50 heads and 100 arms each, making them perhaps the most powerful beings ever created. Their strength was so immense that they could hurl massive boulders like pebbles, shake mountains with their footsteps, and fight entire armies single-handedly. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Uranus, despite being the father of these magnificent beings, grew to hate his own children. Perhaps he feared their power, or maybe he simply couldn't bear the thought of being surpassed by his offspring. Whatever his motivation, he made a decision that would have cosmic consequences. As each child was born, instead of celebrating their arrival, he pushed them back into Gaia's womb, essentially imprisoning them within their mother's body. This wasn't mere cruelty, it was a violation of the natural order itself. Children are meant to be born, to grow, to take their place in the world. By preventing this natural progression, Uranus was essentially stopping time itself, creating a cosmic traffic jam that couldn't continue indefinitely. Gaia, feeling the constant pain of her imprisoned children and the unnatural weight of beings who should have been free, began to plot against her husband. The weapon she created for her revenge was itself a marvel. From the grey adamant, the hardest substance in existence, she forged a great sickle with a serrated edge that could cut through anything, even divine flesh. This wasn't just a tool, but an instrument of cosmic justice, designed specifically to end Uranus's tyrannical rule and free the imprisoned children. Gaia then called her Titan children to council, though they were still trapped within her, and explained her plan. She needed one of them to be brave enough to wield the sickle against their father. Most of the Titans, understandably, were terrified at the thought of attacking the Lord of the Heavens, but Cronus, the youngest and perhaps the most ambitious, stepped forward and agreed to do the deed. The plan they devised was both clever and brutal. Uranus had a habit of coming down each evening to lie with Gaia, and it was during one of these intimate moments that they would strike. As Uranus descended and embraced his wife, Cronus emerged from his hiding place, sickle in hand, and in one swift motion, castrated his father. The aftermath of this act was immediate and far-reaching. As Uranus's severed genitals fell into the sea, they created a white foam from which emerged Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. This is why she's sometimes called Aphrodite, foam-born or sea-born. The blood that dripped from the wound onto the earth gave birth to the Furies, terrible goddesses of vengeance, and the giants, enormous beings who would one day wage war against the Olympian gods. Uranus, wounded and defeated, retreated to the farthest reaches of the sky, but not before delivering a prophecy that would haunt Cronus for the rest of his reign. He declared that just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would Cronus be overthrown by one of his own children. This curse would drive all of Cronus's future actions and ultimately lead to his own downfall. With Uranus gone, Cronus became the undisputed ruler of the cosmos. He freed his siblings from their mother's womb, and together the Titans ushered in what became known as the Golden Age. This was a time of peace and prosperity, when humans lived in harmony with nature, when the earth provided abundantly without need for hard labor, and when death came gently, like sleep, to those who had lived full lives. Cronus married his sister Rhea, and they began to have children of their own. But the prophecy of Uranus haunted Cronus's dreams. He became increasingly paranoid about the possibility of being overthrown, until finally, he made a decision that would prove to be his undoing. Each time Rhea gave birth, Cronus would take the newborn child and swallow it whole, ensuring that none of his offspring could ever grow powerful enough to challenge him. One by one, he devoured his children. First Hestia, who would have become the goddess of the hearth and home. Then Demeter, future goddess of the harvest. Next came Hera, who was destined to be queen of the gods, followed by Hades, the future lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, who would one day rule the seas. Each child disappeared into their father's stomach, alive but trapped, waiting for someone to free them. Rhea, like her mother Gaia before her, could not bear to see this continue. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she devised a plan to save at least one of her children. She travelled to the island of Crete and gave birth in secret to her youngest son Zeus. Then, wrapping a stone in swaddling clothes, she returned to Cronus and presented it to him as their newborn child. Without examining it closely, Cronus swallowed the stone, believing he had consumed another potential threat to his power. Meanwhile, Zeus was hidden away in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete, where he was raised by nymphs and fed on honey and the milk of the goat Amalthea. The Curetes, young warriors devoted to Rhea, would clash their spears against their shields whenever the baby cried, ensuring that Cronus would never hear him and discover the deception. As Zeus grew to manhood, he learned the truth about his father and his siblings. Filled with righteous anger and guided by the wisdom of Metis, a daughter of Oceanus, he prepared to challenge Cronus and free his brothers and sisters. Metis helped him prepare a special potion, a powerful emetic that would force Cronus to vomit up everything he had swallowed. Zeus approached his father, disguised as a cupbearer, and offered him the potion to drink. Cronus, unsuspecting, drank it down and immediately began to regurgitate his children. First came the stone, which Zeus would later set up at Delphi as a monument. Then his 5 siblings emerged, fully grown and ready for battle. They had been conscious all this time within their father's stomach, and they were not happy about their treatment. What followed was a war that would shake the very foundations of the cosmos. The Titanomachy, as this conflict came to be known, lasted for 10 full years. On one side stood the older generation of gods, led by Cronus and most of the Titans. On the other stood Zeus and his siblings, the younger gods who would become known as the Olympians. The war was brutal and seemingly endless. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage, as both possessed immense power and the will to use it. The earth shook with their battles. Mountains were hurled like stones, and the very fabric of reality trembled under the assault. It seemed as though the conflict might continue forever, bringing nothing but destruction to the cosmos. But Zeus proved to be a cleverer strategist than his father. He realized that he needed allies if he was going to win this war. So he descended into Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, who had been imprisoned there since the overthrow of Uranus. In gratitude for their liberation, these powerful beings joined Zeus's cause. The Cyclopes immediately set to work forging weapons for the new gods. For Zeus, they created the Thunderbolt, a weapon of such power that it could split mountains and shake the heavens. For Poseidon, they forged a trident that could cause earthquakes and control the seas. For Hades, they crafted a helmet of invisibility that would allow him to move unseen through any realm. The Hecatonchires, with their 100 hands and 50 heads each, became Zeus's secret weapons. When the final battle came, they pelted the Titans with massive boulders, hurling them so fast and in such numbers that they created a stone storm that blotted out the sun. The Titans, overwhelmed by this unprecedented assault, were finally defeated. Most of the Titans were bound in unbreakable chains and cast into Tartarus, where the Hecatonchires became their eternal guards. But Zeus showed mercy to those who had remained neutral or who had actively supported him. Atlas, who had led the Titan forces, received a special punishment. He was condemned to hold up the heavens for all eternity, ensuring that the sky would never again fall upon the earth. With the Titans defeated, Zeus and his siblings divided the cosmos among themselves. Zeus claimed the sky and became king of the gods. Poseidon took dominion over the seas and all bodies of water. Hades became ruler of the underworld and the dead. The earth and Olympus were considered common territory, shared by all the gods. But Zeus's troubles were far from over. Gaia, angered by the imprisonment of her Titan children, stirred up new enemies to challenge the young king of the gods. First came the giants, those beings born from Uranus's blood, who waged a fierce war against Olympus. Then came Typhon, the most terrible monster ever created, a creature so fearsome that when he first appeared, all the gods fled in terror to Egypt, where they disguised themselves as animals to hide from his wrath. Typhon was a being of pure chaos, with 100 dragon heads that breathed fire, voices that could mimic any sound, and a body that stretched from earth to sky. When he and Zeus finally faced each other in single combat, their battle was so fierce that it melted mountains and boiled the seas. Lightning bolts flew like rain, the earth cracked open, and the foundations of the world groaned under the assault. In the end, Zeus's superior strategy and weapons won the day. He managed to trap Typhon under Mount Etna in Sicily, where the monster's struggles still cause volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. With this final victory, Zeus's position as king of the gods was finally secure. The Olympian gods then established their court on Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, where they built palaces of incredible beauty and luxury. Zeus married Hera, his sister, making her queen of the gods, though their relationship would prove to be turbulent due to Zeus's numerous affairs with both goddesses and mortal women. Each of the major Olympian gods took on specific roles and responsibilities. Athena, born from Zeus's head fully grown and armoured, became the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Apollo, god of music, poetry, and prophecy, brought culture and enlightenment to both gods and mortals. Artemis, his twin sister, became the goddess of the hunt and protector of young women. Aphrodite, born from the sea foam, ruled over love and beauty. Ares embodied the brutal aspects of war, while Hephaestus became the divine blacksmith, creating wonders from metal and fire. Hermes served as the messenger of the gods and guide for souls traveling to the underworld. Demeter controlled the harvest and the fertility of the earth, ensuring that mortals would have food to sustain them. These 12 Olympian gods would go on to interact with mortals, interfere in human affairs, and create the rich tapestry of stories that we know as Greek mythology. But their power and their personalities were shaped by this foundational story of cosmic succession, of children overthrowing parents, of the old order giving way to the new. The themes established in these earliest myths would echo throughout all of Greek mythology. The tension between order and chaos, the price of power, the inevitability of change, and the complex relationships between family members would appear again and again in the stories of heroes like Perseus, Theseus, and Heracles, in the tragic tales of houses like that of Atreus, and in the great epic cycles of the Trojan War and the adventures of Odysseus. What makes these stories so enduring is that they speak to fundamental human experiences and anxieties. The fear of being replaced by the next generation, the struggle to maintain power and authority, the complex dynamics of family relationships, and the search for meaning in a universe that often seems chaotic and unpredictable. The Greek gods, for all their divine power, were recognizably human in their emotions, their flaws, and their struggles. The story of the Greek gods is ultimately a story about the establishment of order from chaos, but it's also a recognition that this order is always provisional, always under threat, always requiring vigilance and strength to maintain. Zeus may have defeated the Titans and established his reign, but he knew that somewhere, perhaps, his own son might be growing up, destined to overthrow him just as he had overthrown his father. This is why the Greek gods remain relevant today. They represent not just ancient superstitions or primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, but sophisticated explorations of the human condition. In their struggles with power, love, jealousy, and mortality, we see reflections of our own struggles, our own fears, and our own hopes for meaning and purpose in an uncertain world. From the yawning void of chaos, the first stirrings of existence began to take shape. But this wasn't some gentle awakening. This was the violent birth of reality itself, and the forces that emerged would make even the most twisted family drama look like a children's bedtime story. Out of the primordial darkness came Gaia, the Earth Mother, vast and fertile and absolutely fundamental to everything that would follow. Picture her not as some gentle nature goddess, but as a cosmic force of creation so powerful that she literally became the foundation upon which all existence would rest. Gaia was the earth itself. Every mountain, every valley, every grain of soil that would one day support temples and cities and the footsteps of heroes. But Gaia wasn't alone in this cosmic awakening. Tartarus emerged as well, that terrifying pit in the deepest depths of the earth where the most dangerous beings would eventually be imprisoned. Think of Tartarus as the universe's maximum security prison, a place so far beneath the earth that even the gods would shudder at its mention. This wasn't just a location. Tartarus was a primordial being, a conscious entity of punishment and containment. And then came Eros, but not the chubby cherub with arrows that we might imagine today. This was Eros, the primordial force, the cosmic power of attraction and desire that would drive all creation forward. Without Eros, nothing would ever come together. Nothing would ever mate or merge or create new life. This was the fundamental force that would compel gods and mortals alike to love, to fight, to create, and ultimately to destroy each other in the name of passion. Erebus, the embodiment of darkness itself, also emerged from chaos, bringing with him the concept of shadow and the unknown. And alongside him came Nyx, night personified, whose dark wings would spread across the cosmos each evening, bringing rest to some and terror to others. But here's where things get really interesting and really weird. Gaia, in her infinite cosmic loneliness, decided she needed a partner. So what did she do? She gave birth to one. She literally created Uranus, the sky, to be her equal and her lover. The ancient sources describe this with beautiful but disturbing poetry. She brought forth Uranus to cover her on every side and to be an ever-sure abiding place for the blessed gods. Now, if you think that sounds problematic, just wait. Because Gaia and Uranus immediately began having children together, and their offspring would become some of the most important figures in all of Greek mythology. First came the 12 Titans, 6 male and 6 female, who would eventually rule the cosmos before the Olympians took over. These weren't just powerful beings, they were the personifications of fundamental cosmic principles. There was Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, and his wife Tethys, goddess of fresh water and nursing. Hyperion, the Titan of light, married his sister Theia, and together they would produce the sun, moon, and dawn. Cronus represented the intellectual axis around which the heavens revolved, while his wife Phoebe embodied prophetic wisdom. And then there was Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, who would become absolutely crucial to our story in ways that would make your skin crawl. But the Titans weren't Gaia and Uranus's only children. They also produced 3 Cyclopes, not the one-eyed monsters of later myth, but master craftsmen who would eventually forge the weapons of the gods. Their names were Thunder, Lightning, and Bright, and they possessed the power to create instruments of divine warfare that could shake the very foundations of reality. And if that wasn't enough, Gaia and Uranus also gave birth to 3 Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, creatures of such immense power and terrifying appearance that they would become the ultimate weapons in the wars between gods. Each had 50 heads and 100 arms, and their strength was beyond measure. Now here's where the family dysfunction really kicks into high gear. Uranus, upon seeing his children, these titans, cyclopes, and hundred-handed ones, was filled with disgust and fear. Some sources say he was horrified by their power, others that he was jealous of their potential. But whatever his motivation, Uranus made a decision that would doom him. He shoved his children back into Gaia's womb the moment they were born, imprisoning them in the depths of the earth. Imagine the cosmic horror of this situation. Gaia, the Earth Mother, was being used as a prison for her own children by her husband's son. The pain was unbearable, both physical and emotional. Her body was stretched and tormented by the titans struggling within her, while her heart broke for her imprisoned offspring. For ages, this situation continued, with Uranus maintaining his tyrannical control over both his wife and his children. But Gaia's pain was transforming into something far more dangerous: rage. And when a cosmic force like Gaia gets angry, the consequences shake the very foundations of reality. In her fury and desperation, Gaia devised a plan that would change everything. She created the first weapon ever made, a sickle of adamantine, a metal harder than diamond and sharper than any earthly blade. This wasn't just a tool, it was an instrument of cosmic revolution, forged from Gaia's pain and determination. Then Gaia called her imprisoned children to her and revealed her plan. She needed one of them to strike down their father, to castrate him and end his tyrannical reign. Most of the Titans recoiled in horror at the thought of such violence against their father. But Cronus, the youngest and most cunning, stepped forward. His agreement to carry out this horrific deed would echo through mythology for generations to come. The trap was set with terrifying precision. When Uranus came to lie with Gaia, as he did each night, Cronus was waiting. Hidden by darkness and armed with his mother's adamantine sickle, he struck with swift brutality. The castration of Uranus was described in the ancient sources with graphic detail that still makes readers uncomfortable thousands of years later. But here's the thing about cosmic violence. It has cosmic consequences. As Uranus's severed genitals fell into the sea, the mixture of divine blood and sea foam gave birth to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. From an act of ultimate violence and betrayal came the force that would drive passion throughout the universe. The irony is almost unbearable, and that wasn't all. Where drops of Uranus's blood hit the earth, they gave birth to the Furies, the Erinyes, goddesses of vengeance who would pursue those who committed crimes against family. The giants also sprang from this divine blood, powerful beings who would one day threaten the gods themselves. Even in his defeat, Uranus ensured that violence and retribution would be woven into the very fabric of reality. With his dying breath, Uranus cursed his son Cronus, prophesying that Cronus too would be overthrown by one of his own children. This curse would hang over Cronus for the rest of his reign, driving him to acts of paranoia and cruelty that would make his father's crimes seem almost gentle by comparison. And so ended the reign of Uranus, the first king of the cosmos. His overthrow marked the end of the primordial age and the beginning of something new, the age of the Titans, with Cronus as their king. But as we'll see, the patterns established in this first cosmic revolution, the cycles of violence, betrayal, and succession, would repeat themselves with even greater intensity in the generations to come. The lesson was clear. Power in the cosmos was not inherited peacefully, but seized through violence, and every king carried within himself the seeds of his own destruction. The children would always rise against the fathers, and the wheel of cosmic succession would continue to turn, grinding heroes and tyrants alike beneath its inexorable weight. Achilles' wrath had finally cooled to embers, but the war itself burned on with relentless fury. The funeral fires of Hector had barely dimmed when new champions arrived at Troy's gates, drawn by the promise of glory and the scent of approaching doom. From the distant lands of the Amazons came Penthesilea, daughter of Ares himself, leading 12 warrior queens whose skill with spear and bow rivaled that of any hero. These were women who had chosen the path of war over the traditional roles of wife and mother, who rode horses like centaurs and fought with a ferocity that made even battle-hardened Trojans step back in awe. Penthesilea was magnificent in her bronze armor, tall as a goddess with eyes like storm clouds and hair that flowed like liquid gold beneath her crested helmet. She had come to Troy not for treasure or territory, but for something far more precious: the chance to test herself against the greatest warrior of the age. The Amazon queen burned with a desire to face Achilles in single combat, to either claim immortal glory by defeating him or die gloriously in the attempt. When she entered Troy through the Scaean gates, the very stones seemed to sing. The Trojan people, desperate for hope after losing their greatest defender, saw in this magnificent warrior woman a sign that the gods had not entirely abandoned them. Priam himself, aged beyond his years by grief and siege, felt his heart lift for the first time since Hector's death. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything the war had yet witnessed. Penthesilea led her Amazons in a charge that shattered the Argive front lines like pottery against bronze. Her spear found its mark with every thrust. Her sword sang its deadly song, and where she rode, enemy warriors fell like wheat before the scythe. But fate had already written the ending to this particular song. When Achilles finally faced the Amazon queen in single combat, the outcome was as inevitable as sunrise. Yet, in the moment when his spear pierced her heart, something extraordinary happened. As her helmet fell away, and he saw her face clearly for the first time, Achilles felt a pain deeper than grief, the agony of love discovered too late. Penthesilea died beautiful and brave, and in her final moments, some say she smiled, having achieved what she came for, a glorious death at the hands of the world's greatest warrior. Achilles wept over her body, as he had once wept for Patroclus, and the watching armies fell silent before this display of warrior's remorse. From the distant shores of Ethiopia came another champion who would test the son of Peleus. Memnon, son of the dawn goddess Eos, arrived with an army of dark-skinned warriors whose bronze armor gleamed like the sun itself. This prince of the morning possessed divine blood equal to Achilles' own, and when he stood before Troy's walls, even the stones seemed to recognize the presence of destiny. Memnon was everything a hero should be: tall and handsome, skilled with every weapon, generous to his friends and terrible to his enemies. His very presence rekindled hope in Trojan hearts and struck fear into Argive souls. Here was a champion who might actually prove Achilles' equal, who possessed the divine heritage necessary to stand against the son of Thetis. The duel between these two demigod princes became the stuff of legend even as it unfolded. For hours they fought, bronze against bronze, divine strength against divine skill. The earth trembled beneath their feet, the air sang with the music of clashing weapons, and both armies watched in awed silence as two sons of goddesses played out their deadly dance. In the end, it was experience that proved decisive. Achilles had been forged in the crucible of 9 years' warfare, had learned his deadly craft through countless battles against the finest warriors of Troy. Memnon, for all his divine heritage and natural skill, could not match the terrible expertise that only constant warfare could provide. When the Ethiopian prince fell, his mother Eos wept tears that became the morning dew, and Zeus himself granted her son a form of immortality, transformation into a bird that would sing each dawn in memory of the hero's glory. But for Achilles, this victory brought no joy, only the growing certainty that his own end drew near. The prophecies were clear now, spoken in the wind and written in the flight of birds. Paris and Apollo waited somewhere in his future, the archer god's silver bow already drawn, the arrow nocked that would find the one vulnerable spot where mortality touched even the greatest of heroes. Each victory brought him closer to that moment, each fallen enemy another step on the path to his own doom. But before that fated arrow found its mark, one more great deed awaited. The war itself had reached a stalemate that conventional warfare could not break. Troy's walls, built by gods, remained impregnable to direct assault. The Argive forces, depleted by 10 years of siege, lacked the strength for another massive offensive. What was needed was not force, but cunning, the kind of subtle stratagem that only one man among all the heroes possessed. Odysseus, the fox of Ithaca, had been watching and waiting, his clever mind spinning plans within plans. He understood what his more straightforward companions could not grasp, that Troy would never fall to honest warfare. The city's walls were too strong, its defenders too brave, its position too advantageous. Victory would require deception on a scale that would make the gods themselves marvel at mortal ingenuity. The plan that emerged from Odysseus's fertile imagination was audacious beyond belief. The Argives would appear to abandon their siege, sailing away as if finally defeated after 10 years of fruitless effort. But they would leave behind a gift, a massive wooden horse, supposedly an offering to Athena to ensure safe passage home. Hidden within this hollow construction would be the greatest heroes of the Argive host, ready to emerge once the horse had been brought within Troy's walls. While the city celebrated what appeared to be their victory, these hidden warriors would open the gates for the main army, which would return under cover of darkness to complete the destruction that 10 years of open warfare had been unable to achieve. The construction of the horse became a masterwork of both engineering and artistry. Epius, the master craftsman, created a hollow marvel large enough to hold dozens of warriors, yet beautiful enough to convince the Trojans of its divine purpose. Every detail was carefully planned, from the hidden door that would allow the warriors to emerge, to the breathing holes disguised as decorative elements. The psychological aspects of the deception were equally crucial. Sinon, a relative of Odysseus, volunteered for perhaps the most dangerous role of all, remaining behind to convince the Trojans that the horse was indeed a sacred offering. His story was carefully crafted. He was a deserter from the Argive army, left behind by vengeful commanders who had discovered his supposed crimes. When the Trojan scouts found the empty Argive camp and the massive horse standing alone on the beach, the sight must have seemed like the answer to 10 years of prayers. The enemy ships had vanished beyond the horizon. Their camps lay abandoned, and only this magnificent wooden offering remained as evidence of their presence. The debate that followed in Troy's council chambers would echo through history. Cassandra, the prophetic daughter of Priam, who was cursed never to be believed, screamed warnings about the horse that none would heed. Laocoon, the priest of Poseidon, hurled his spear at the horse's side and declared that Greeks bearing gifts were never to be trusted. But the gods themselves seemed to support the deception. When Laocoon prepared to sacrifice to Poseidon, 2 enormous sea serpents emerged from the waves and crushed both the priest and his sons in their coils. To the watching Trojans, this divine intervention seemed clear confirmation that the horse was indeed sacred, and that Laocoon's opposition had earned celestial punishment. Sinon's performance was masterful. With tears streaming down his face, he told his carefully rehearsed tale of betrayal and abandonment, of how the horse had been built as an offering to Athena to ensure the Argives' safe return home. The size of the construction, he explained, was deliberate, made too large to fit through Troy's gates so that the Trojans could never claim the goddess's favor for themselves. This detail proved to be the stroke of genius that sealed Troy's fate. Rather than leaving the horse outside their walls, the Trojans became determined to bring it within the city, even if doing so required partially dismantling the very fortifications that had protected them for 10 years. The psychology was perfect. By making the horse seem deliberately inaccessible, Odysseus had made the Trojans desperate to possess it. The night of Troy's fall began with celebration. For the first time in a decade, the city's gates stood open without fear. Wine flowed freely, music filled the streets, and the people of Troy gave themselves over to joy at their apparent deliverance. The wooden horse stood in the central square like a monument to their victory, admired by crowds who saw in it proof that even the mightiest enemies could be defeated. But as darkness deepened and exhausted celebration gave way to sleep, the hidden door in the horse's belly opened silently. One by one, the greatest heroes of the Argive host emerged. Odysseus himself, Menelaus burning for revenge, Diomedes still terrible in war, and others whose names had become synonymous with martial prowess. Their first task was to signal the returning fleet. Fire signals blazed from Troy's highest tower, calling back the ships that had hidden behind the nearby island of Tenedos. As the main army approached the now undefended walls, the heroes within the city moved to secure the gates and eliminate any guards who might raise an alarm. The slaughter that followed was systematic and merciless. This was not the clean combat of heroic warfare, but the brutal efficiency of a city taken by storm. Houses burned, families fled, screaming through streets that ran red with blood, and the accumulated wealth of centuries was seized by vengeful conquerors. King Priam met his end at the altar of Zeus Herkaios in his own palace, cut down by Neoptolemus, the young son of Achilles, who had inherited all his father's skill in war, but none of his occasional mercy. The old king's death was neither noble nor heroic, merely the confused end of a man who had outlived his time and watched his world crumble around him. Hector's infant son Astyanax was hurled from the city's walls, a brutal act designed to ensure that no heir could grow up to claim vengeance. The child's death represented the final severing of Troy's future, the absolute end of any possibility that the royal line might continue. But perhaps the most tragic fate befell Cassandra, the prophet whose warnings had gone unheeded. She was dragged from Athena's temple by Ajax the Lesser, her violation of sanctuary adding sacrilege to the night's catalogue of horrors. This act of impiety would later bring divine vengeance upon the Argive fleet. But on that night of Troy's fall, the gods seemed to have turned their faces away from justice. Helen, the cause of all this destruction, was found cowering in her chambers. When Menelaus burst in with sword drawn, ready to claim the revenge he had dreamed of for 10 years, her beauty once again proved stronger than his rage. The sword fell from nerveless fingers, as love and desire reasserted their ancient power over his heart. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins, the great city that had withstood 10 years of siege lay in ashes. The towers that had seemed to touch the sky were broken stones. The walls that gods had built were breached and shattered, and the people who had called Troy home were dead, enslaved, or scattered to the winds. The victorious Argives gathered their spoils and prepared for the journey home. But they had forgotten something crucial in their moment of triumph: that the gods who had allowed Troy's destruction were not finished with their manipulations. The same divine forces that had orchestrated the city's fall would now turn their attention to the victors, and the homecoming that should have been a celebration would become a series of tragedies that would scatter the heroes across the wine-dark sea. The wooden horse stood empty now in Troy's ruined square, its purpose fulfilled. It had been the instrument of the city's doom, the final stratagem in a war that had consumed a generation. But it was also something more, a symbol of how intelligence could triumph over strength, How cunning could succeed where courage had failed. How the mind of one clever man could accomplish what 10 years of heroic warfare could not. As the smoke from Troy's funeral pyre rose to join the clouds, the greatest siege in history was finally over. The city that had seemed eternal had proven as mortal as the heroes who died beneath its walls. The war that had begun with a golden apple and a judgment clouded by desire had ended with wooden deception and the screams of the dying. The age of heroes was passing away, and with it, the world that had given birth to such magnificent and terrible deeds. The survivors would carry the memory of Troy to distant shores, and poets yet unborn would sing of its glory and its fall. But the city itself was gone forever, its stones scattered, its people vanished, its name destined to become a byword for the price of pride and the wages of war. The wind carried the ashes across the plain where so many heroes had died, mixing the dust of kings and commoners, victors and vanquished, until none could tell one from another in death's democracy. Somewhere in the ruins, a nightingale sang of sorrows yet to come, its voice lost in the vast indifference of the star-scattered sky. The sun rises over the wine-dark sea, painting Troy's walls in shades of blood and gold, as our tale continues, where wrath left its mark. The funeral pyres of heroes have burned to ash. The greatest champions lie silent in their tombs, and yet the war that began with a golden apple still rages on. For though Achilles has claimed his vengeance, and Hector's honour has been restored, the fates have woven threads of destiny that stretch far beyond any single hero's glory or grief. In the shadowed halls of Olympus, where ambrosia flows like wine and divine politics shape mortal destinies, the immortals gather once more. But now their attention turns not to the familiar faces who have dominated this conflict for 9 long years, but to new champions rising from distant lands. The war that started as a dispute between Greeks and Trojans is about to become something far grander and more terrible. A clash of civilizations that will draw warriors from the very edges of the known world. Zeus, the cloud gatherer, sits upon his golden throne and contemplates the scales of fate. The death of Troy's greatest defender has tipped the balance, but not toward the swift conclusion many expected. Instead, new weights are being added to both sides of the cosmic equation. From the sunrise lands beyond the great river that circles the earth, an army marches westward, led by a prince whose skin gleams like burnished bronze and whose spear has never known defeat. From the land of warrior women, where daughters learn to draw the bow before they can walk, a queen rides north with her Amazons, seeking glory in the shadow of Troy's walls. These are the allies that King Priam's desperate envoys have summoned in the dark hours after Hector's death. Gold and promises of eternal glory have brought him champions whose very names strike fear into the hearts of distant peoples. But the Greeks too have sent their messengers racing across the wine-dark seas, calling upon old debts and sacred oaths to bring fresh strength to their cause. The war that began with 1,000 ships is about to welcome 1,000 more. Yet even as these new players enter our tale, the original heroes continue their eternal dance of glory and doom. Achilles, having tasted the sweet wine of vengeance, finds that it has left him thirsting for something deeper. The rage that sustained him through Patroclus' death and Hector's destruction has cooled to embers, leaving behind a terrible emptiness that no amount of killing can fill. In the pre-dawn darkness, he stands beside his ships and watches the stars wheel overhead, each point of light a reminder that his own time grows short. The prophecies have not been forgotten. Paris and Apollo wait somewhere beyond tomorrow's horizon. The archer god's silver bow already drawn, the arrow nocked that will find the one vulnerable spot where mortality touches even the greatest of heroes. But before that final arrow flies, before the wooden horse casts its shadow across Troy's walls, Other stories must unfold. Other heroes must rise and fall. Other loves must bloom and wither. Other choices must be made that will echo through the ages. For this is the nature of epic tales. They grow like mighty trees, sending out branches that spawn their own legends. The trunk of our story remains the wrath of Achilles and its consequences. But now we follow the spreading canopy to discover what other fruits this war has borne. We shall meet the Amazon queen whose beauty rivals Helen's and whose skill in battle surpasses that of many men. We shall witness the coming of Memnon, son of the dawn, whose armor blazes like the sunrise, and whose fate is intertwined with that of Achilles himself. We shall see how Odysseus, the fox of Ithaca, weaves the stratagem that will finally bring Troy's walls tumbling down. We shall follow brave Diomedes as he faces challenges that test not just his strength, but his very understanding of what it means to be heroic. We shall watch as Ajax the Great, tower of Greek strength, confronts a doom more terrible than any enemy's spear, the darkness that can consume a warrior's soul when honor becomes obsession. But perhaps most importantly, we shall discover how the seeds of Troy's destruction were planted not by Greek cunning or divine wrath alone, but by the city's own choices. How pride and stubbornness, the very virtues that made Troy great, become the flaws that ensure its fall. How the bonds of family and duty that give life meaning can also become chains that drag the innocent down into darkness. The women of Troy move through our tale like threads of gold woven through dark tapestry. Hecuba, the Queen Mother, whose dreams of serpents and burning towers prove all too prophetic. Andromache, the widow whose love transcends death itself. Cassandra, the prophetess cursed to speak truth that none will believe, watching helplessly as every disaster she foretells comes to pass. And Helen herself, the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships, now trapped in a city that both loves and hates her, knowing that her very existence has become a curse upon all who shelter her. The gods too continue their eternal machinations, though their attention begins to turn toward the greater patterns that govern mortal existence. Athena and Aphrodite maintain their ancient grudge, each seeking to prove the superiority of wisdom over beauty, or beauty over wisdom. Apollo tends his beloved Trojans while knowing that his protection can only delay, not prevent, their ultimate fate. And Zeus himself, bound by prophecies older than memory, watches the working out of destinies that even he cannot alter. But threading through all these grand themes of fate and heroism, love and loss, runs a more intimate story, the tale of how war changes those who fight it. We shall see young men who sailed from Greece as boys return as hollow-eyed veterans, if they return at all. We shall witness the transformation of Troy from a proud city into a fortress under siege, where children grow up knowing no world beyond the shadow of war. We shall explore how the very values that make civilization possible, hospitality, honor, respect for the gods, become weapons turned against their believers. The Trojan War, in its final phase, becomes a meditation on the price of greatness. Every victory carries the seeds of future sorrow. Every act of heroism demands payment in blood and tears. The warriors who achieve immortal glory through their deeds purchase that immortality with their lives, leaving behind widows and orphans to mourn their absence. The city that refuses to surrender its honor faces annihilation as the price of that refusal. Yet for all its darkness, our tale is not without light. In the midst of devastating war, we find moments of transcendent beauty, a warrior's prayer to his gods, a mother's lullaby to her child, a poet's song that transforms suffering into art. We discover that human dignity can shine brightest in the darkest hours, that love can endure even when hope is lost, that the very fragility of mortal life gives it a preciousness that the immortal gods can only envy. The techniques of warfare evolve throughout our story, as both sides adapt to new challenges and develop new strategies. The static siege of the early years gives way to dynamic campaigns that range across the Trojan plain and beyond. Naval battles complement the land fighting as both sides seek to control the sea routes that supply their armies. The introduction of new allies brings fresh tactical approaches that force commanders to rethink their assumptions about how battles should be fought. But more profound than any tactical innovation is the psychological evolution of the warriors themselves. Men who began this conflict fighting for glory and honor find themselves motivated by grimmer purposes: survival, vengeance, the desperate hope of seeing home again. The clear moral distinctions that seemed so obvious in the war's early days blur as atrocities mount on both sides, and the innocent suffer alongside the guilty. Religious practices too change under the pressure of endless conflict. The gods who once seemed reliable protectors become capricious forces whose favor must be constantly courted and whose wrath must be perpetually appeased. Sacrifice and ritual take on new urgency as both sides seek divine intervention to break the stalemate that has consumed so many lives. Some warriors lose their faith entirely, while others cling to it with desperate intensity, finding in prayer and offering their only refuge from the war's brutality. The economy of warfare creates its own dynamics as both sides struggle to maintain armies in the field for years on end. Troy's wealth, accumulated through centuries of peaceful trade, gradually depletes under the strain of constant siege. The Greek alliance, held together initially by shared purpose and mutual benefit, begins to fray as the costs mount and the rewards seem ever more distant. Piracy and raiding become necessary supplements to formal military action as both sides seek the resources needed to continue fighting. Cultural exchange, ironically, flourishes even in the midst of hostility. Greek warriors learn Trojan fighting techniques, while Trojans adopt innovations developed by their besiegers. Languages blend as prisoners, and deserters carry words and concepts across battle lines. Artistic styles influence each other as craftsmen observe foreign techniques and adapt them to local tastes. Even in war, human creativity finds ways to transcend the barriers that divide peoples. The role of women in this martial society reveals itself in countless ways throughout our continuing tale. Beyond the famous figures who shape great events, we see the ordinary women who keep civilization functioning while their men fight and die. The priestesses who maintain religious observances, the craftswomen who produce the goods that armies need, the mothers who raise children in the shadow of war. All play their parts in the grand tragedy that unfolds. Trade networks, disrupted but not destroyed by the conflict, create unexpected connections between distant lands. Merchants who brave the dangers of war-torn seas carry not just goods but information, spreading news of the great conflict to peoples who know Troy and Greece only as names in sailors' tales. Some of these distant observers begin to see opportunity in the mutual destruction of two great powers, laying plans that will reshape the Eastern Mediterranean when the war finally ends. The younger generation that has grown up during the war represents both hope and tragedy for the future. Children who have known nothing but conflict carry within them the seeds of either healing or continued violence. Some, like Astyanax, Hector's young son, become symbols of innocence destroyed by adult ambitions. Others, like Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, embody the continuation of heroic traditions into a new and darker age. Environmental factors play an increasing role as the war drags on. The plain of Troy, once fertile farmland, becomes a scarred wasteland marked by burial mounds and abandoned fortifications. The great forests that once covered the surrounding hills disappear as both sides harvest timber for ships, siege engines, and funeral pyres. Even the rivers run differently, their courses altered by the detritus of war and the earthworks of besiegers. Magic and prophecy weave through the story with increasing frequency as mortals seek supernatural solutions to what seem like insoluble problems. Seers and oracles find themselves in high demand as military commanders seek glimpses of the future that might provide strategic advantage. Curses and blessings become weapons of war as potent as bronze spears and sharp swords. The boundary between the natural and supernatural blurs as desperate times call for desperate measures. The concept of heroism itself undergoes transformation as the war's character changes. The individual duels between champions that mark the conflict's early phases give way to larger, more complex battles, where victory depends more on coordination and endurance than on personal prowess. Young warriors who dream of achieving the glory won by Achilles and Hector find that the opportunities for such individual distinction have largely passed, replaced by the grinding necessity of collective action. Political intrigue becomes increasingly important as both sides seek advantages that cannot be won through direct military action. Assassination plots, bribery attempts, and diplomatic missions multiply as leaders explore alternatives to the frontal assaults that have proven so costly. The war of spears and shields is supplemented by a war of whispers and gold, fought in palace corridors and merchant houses rather than on open battlefields. The treatment of prisoners and the conduct of warfare itself evolves as both sides grapple with the moral implications of prolonged conflict. Early chivalrous customs give way to harsher practices as compassion becomes a luxury that few can afford. Yet even in this darkening atmosphere, individual acts of mercy and honor shine like stars in a moonless sky, reminding us that human decency can survive even the worst circumstances. Medical knowledge advances rapidly under the pressure of treating countless battle wounds. Physicians who began the war with limited understanding of anatomy and healing develop new techniques through grim necessity. The care of wounded warriors becomes a science in its own right, with implications that extend far beyond the immediate needs of military medicine. The chroniclers and poets who record these events for posterity find their role changing as well. No longer content to simply celebrate heroic deeds, they begin to grapple with the deeper meanings of the conflict they witness. The songs they sing around campfires carry not just tales of glory, but meditations on the costs of war and the nature of human destiny. These artists become the memory of their civilization, preserving not just facts, but the emotional truth of what it means to live through such times. As our tale continues, all these threads will weave together into a tapestry of unprecedented complexity and beauty. The simple story of a war between two cities expands to encompass questions that will resonate through all of human history. What is the proper relationship between individual desire and collective responsibility? How should mortals conduct themselves when they know their time is limited? What makes life worth living when death is always near? How can we find meaning in suffering, purpose in chaos, hope in darkness? The answers to these questions will not come easily or simply. They will emerge gradually through the actions and choices of characters who often do not fully understand the implications of their decisions. Heroes will make choices that doom them while thinking they choose glory. Lovers will sacrifice everything for passion only to discover that their sacrifice was meaningless. Kings will preserve their honor at the cost of their kingdoms, while wise men will watch helplessly as their wisdom goes unheeded. But in the end, our tale will reveal that even in failure, even in defeat, even in death itself, human beings can achieve a kind of victory through the simple act of remaining true to their deepest values. The city of Troy may fall, its walls may crumble, its people may be scattered to the winds, but the courage and love and loyalty that its defenders display in their final hours will echo through eternity. The Greek heroes may win their war only to discover that victory has cost them everything they held dear, but their willingness to pay that price for their ideals will inspire generations yet unborn. This is the story we now continue to tell. Not just of a war between mortals, but of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, meaning and meaninglessness, hope and despair that defines the human condition. It is a story that began before Troy was built and will continue long after its stones have crumbled to dust. For as long as human beings must choose between comfort and honor, between safety and glory, between the easy path and the right path, the echoes of this ancient war will continue to resonate in their hearts. The dawn breaks over the Trojan plain, and new heroes stride forth to meet their destinies. The stage is set for the final acts of this great drama, where gods and mortals alike will discover that some choices, once made, can never be unmade, and some prices, once paid, can never be refunded. Let us follow where their footsteps lead, into the gathering storm that will reshape the world. In the beginning, before the ordered cosmos we know today, there was only chaos, a gaping void, a yawning darkness that stretched endlessly in all directions. This was not mere emptiness, but something far more profound, the primordial state from which all existence would emerge. From this swirling, formless abyss, the first divine beings came into existence through mysterious forces that even the gods themselves could not fully comprehend. First emerged Gaia, the earth herself, not merely the ground beneath our feet, but the very foundation of all life, the nurturing mother from whose body all other beings would spring. She arose vast and eternal, her form encompassing mountains and valleys, rivers and plains, providing the stable foundation upon which the ordered world could be built. Gaia was both gentle mother and terrible force, capable of bringing forth life in abundance or swallowing it whole in her wrath. From the depths came Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit beneath the earth, a place so far below the surface that a bronze anvil dropped from earth would fall for 9 days before reaching its shadowy depths. This would become the prison of the gods, where divine justice would exile those who threatened the cosmic order. Tartarus was not merely a location, but a primordial deity himself, representing the ultimate punishment and the furthest extremes of divine power. Alongside these fundamental forces arose Eros, the primordial deity of love and desire, not the cherubic figure of later imagination, but an ancient cosmic force whose power could overwhelm gods and mortals alike. This Eros represented the fundamental drive that would bring beings together, creating the unions from which new generations of gods would spring. Without this primordial love, the universe would have remained forever sterile and unchanging. Erebus emerged as the personification of darkness itself, while his sister Nyx embodied the night. These twin powers of shadow and darkness were not evil, but necessary, representing the hidden mysteries, the unknown depths, and the restorative power of rest and dreams. Nyx would become one of the most respected deities, so powerful that even Zeus himself would hesitate to cross her. From these primordial beings, the first generation of deities began to emerge. Gaia, in her creative power, brought forth Uranus, the starry sky who would stretch over her like a cosmic dome, covering her completely and becoming both her equal and her first consort. This Sky Father possessed the vast authority of the heavens, ruling over the celestial realm with absolute power, but his authority would prove both blessing and curse for his offspring. The union of earth and sky produced the first generation of truly divine beings, the 12 Titans, whose names would echo through eternity. There was Oceanus, the vast river that encircled the entire world, and his wife Tethys, mother of all rivers and springs. Hyperion embodied the light of the sun, while his sister Thea represented the divine light that makes precious metals and gems sparkle. Rhea would become the mother of the Olympian gods, while Cronus would inherit his father's throne through an act of violence that would define the nature of divine succession for generations. Alongside the Titans came three Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, whose names meant thunder, lightning, and bright flash. These master craftsmen possessed supernatural skill in metalworking and would eventually forge the weapons that would decide the fate of the cosmos. Their single eyes blazed like the sun, and their strength could shake mountains, but their wisdom and loyalty would make them invaluable allies to the eventual victors in the cosmos.